Hello, and once again, I welcome you back to my YouTube channel. In this video, we are going to be looking at VPC Endpoint. And in the hands-on demonstration, we are going to be implementing something similar to what we have on the screen. But for us to better uh, understand and appreciate the architectural diagram on the screen, it is important to understand what is VPC endpoint, why do you want to use, or why would you want to use VPC endpoint, how are you going to use it, and how can you deploy it in your environment. So let us understand what is VPC endpoint. As displayed on the screen, a VPC endpoint is a configuration that allows your Amazon VPC to connect to supported AWS services or VPC endpoint services. And this connection is private as there is no need for internet. And that means you wouldn't have to attach internet gateway. You would not need to configure NAT devices. There will be no need for a VPN connection, as well as your AWS Direct Connect. So there's virtually no need for internet access in your architecture, but you will still be able to access supported AWS resources securely and in a scalable way. Now, usually this type of architecture is meant to improve security in an AWS environment. Now, there are two types of VPC endpoint. We have the interface endpoint and we have the gateway endpoint. The gateway endpoint is specifically designed to work with Amazon S3 bucket and DynamoDB service. Why for every other AWS or supported AWS services, we use interface endpoint. Now, why would you want to use VPC endpoint? One, it enhances security because your entire infrastructure is protected from public internet. There's no internet access in and out of the infrastructure. So there is a reduce or complete isolation of your infrastructure from public interference. Also, there's a network isolation. You can create an internet isolated network, which will improve the entire security posture of your environment. Also, your architecture become entirely private because sometimes you want to imagine, is VPC actually private? Because VPC is meant to be a virtual private cloud or network. But by the time you introduce internet into your environment, maybe through internet gateway or through the private link or through the NAT device, you have indirectly exposed your VPC to the public. So you want to ask the question if VPC is actually private. And also one of the reasons why you want to use VPC endpoint is for compliance purposes. Sometimes there are situations where certain certain compliance requirements would require that a certain information or data should not be exposed to the public internet. You can use VPC endpoint to access or make these resources available without exposing them to the public internet. Now, having understood what VPC is, the type of VPC, having understood what VPC endpoint is, the type of VPC endpoint, and why you will want to use VPC endpoint. Let us look at two scenarios where you will want to implement VPC in your enterprise or production environment. Let's look at this scenario number one. You are a part of a cloud security and network team managing workload in a highly restricted AWS environment. Your company security policy prohibits outbound internet access from private subnet. That means your company doesn't allow internet access outbound. But yet, the application that is running in your environment, for instance, EC2 in this case, need to have access to an Amazon S3 bucket, which is not in your VPC, but it is still in your environment. And currently, you cannot connect because the route to S3 require an internet gateway or a NAT gateway, which violates your compliance requirement and had unnecessary cost. So the problem is, how will you securely allow your EC2 instance to access Amazon S3 without exposing the traffic to a public internet? So this is a practical enterprise production environment scenario that we can, implement using the VPC endpoint. Now let us look at a second one, which is similar to this. In a similar scenario, you are a part of a cloud security and a DevOps team managing a multi-account AWS environment. One of your clients requires EC2 instance in a private subnet. There's no internet access and there's no NAT gateway. But your client wants to upload logs into configuration files, which is in an S3 bucket. And the challenge is that you need to enable a secure and scalable access to this S3 without exposing the subnet to the public internet. So the problem statement is, how would you implement a VPC endpoint to allow EC2 instance in a private subnet to access your S3 bucket securely? So these two scenarios are possible, and you can achieve them by implementing an architecture that we saw earlier using VPC endpoint. Now, let us quickly explain that architecture and how it can be used to access or to achieve these problem situations. So if you go back to the architecture, you can see in this architecture, we have our AWS region, and inside it, we have our VPC. And inside our VPC, we have a private subnet. So this private subnet has no internet access. Of course, that is why it is private. And we have an S3 bucket which needed to be accessible from this EC2 machine. This EC2 machine needs to be able to log, to put logs into this. You need to be able to put logs into this S3 bucket. But this S3 bucket is not in the same subnet as the EC2 instance. And there's no internet. And that is where our VPC endpoint comes in. So what we are going to do here is we are going to configure a VPC endpoint through which our EC2 instance can access the S3 bucket. So the EC2 instance will connect to the VPC endpoint, and the VPC endpoint will route the traffic to what? To our S3 bucket. Now, how are we going to do this? So we are going to set up our EC2 instance in our private subnet, and we are going to be accessing the EC2 instance through another AWS service called Session Manager. This Session Manager is managed by AWS System Manager. So this Session Manager will not require internet access, will not require a key pair like your SSH, but we will only need to attach an IAM role, which is an EC2 instance profile, which will give permission to your EC2 instance to access System Manager. And that will allow us to access the EC2 instance. So when we get to EC2 instance, then we are going to create some VPC endpoint. That VPC endpoint will now connect us towards S3 bucket. So for the VPC endpoint, we are going to be we are going to be configuring about 3 or 4 VPC endpoints. One that will allow connection to S3 bucket, and the other one will allow for the connectivity with EC2 instance. So this is what we are going to be implementing. So without much ado, we are going to jump on our AWS console, and we are going to implement this configuration. So I'm going to go onto my AWS console. I'm going to log in through my SSO. So a push notification has been sent to my Okta identity, and I'm going to accept it. And I'm going to log into my AWS Access Portal. And I'm going to be working from my management of my management account, which is not a best practice anyway. I'm going to be logging in as an administrator or with the administrator access. Now we are on our AWS console, and the first thing you want to do is to create your VPC. So many ways to access VPC. You can come here and type VPC, okay? Or if you already have it, like myself, I already have it here, so I can go ahead and click on VPC, and you can go from here under VPC, or you can click on your VPC. There's a default VPC here, which we are not going to use. We'll go ahead and create our own VPC. So I will click Create VPC, and I'll get my VPC name. I will give it SPZ Tech VPC, and I'm going to go with a CIDR block 10.0.0.0/16, and I'm going to leave my tenancy as default, and I will go ahead and create VPC. After creating a VPC, we'll go ahead and create our subnet. When you create a subnet, automatically a route table is created for you. For example, if you go to route table now, you will see that we have only the default route table. By the time we create our subnet, a main route table will be created along with it. So I'll go to subnet now. You can see we have 6 subnets here already. We are not going to use any of them because if you see, they are all attached to the default VPC. You can see they are all attached to the default VPC, but we don't want that. So we click on create subnet, and it's going to ask us which of the VPC are you creating your subnet. I will select my SPTech VPC, and I'm going to give it a name, SPZ Tech VPC, subnet, and I will call it private because my subnet is private. I will call it private, and it's asking me which of the availability zone. You can leave it for no preference if you like, but I'm going to choose our US East 1A availability zone. This is our CIDR range that we selected earlier on. Now you need to give a CIDR range to your subnet, and I'm going to give it 10.0.1.0/24. I'm going to leave everything as it is, and I'm going to click on create subnet. Now, if you create subnet, if you head over to your route table, and if you refresh, you will see now that another route table has been created. So let us rename this route table. Let us call it SPZ Tech route table. Let's call it RT, and we'll click on save. So the next thing to do now is we need to associate this route table to the subnet. So you will come under subnet association. You click on subnet association. You click on edit, and you select your subnet, and you click on save. So if you click on subnet association now, you can see that the subnet has been associated with the route table. So now we have created our, if you go back to our architectural diagram, we have created our VPC, and we have created our private subnet. We have created the route table. Now, there are some important resources that are also necessary for the configuration. First, we need a security group. We need two security groups. One, we need a security group for our EC2 instance. This security group is going to be an empty security group because we don't need internet from anywhere. So it's going to be a blank security group, but we need to create it. And also we need to create another security group for our VPC endpoint. This security group needs to allow outbound or inbound port on port 443. This is a standard protocol that is used by VPC endpoint to allow API calls from every other AWS services. So we need to create two security groups, one for our EC2 in private subnet and one for our VPC endpoint. So let's head over and create those security group. So I will go ahead now. I will go to my EC2 instance. You can see security group under EC2 instance, and I think you can see it too. Okay, we can also see it under our VPC. So we don't need to go to EC2 instance. So I can just go on the left pane here, and I will click on security group. So we already have some security group in place. So I will just go here and say create security group. And I will give this one. I will create the first security group, and I will call it our VPC endpoint security group, and it must allow port 443. In which of the VPC? Of course, in our VPC. So I'll select our VPC here. Okay. And it is actually the outbound rule. Okay. So I can hand outbound, and I will choose my HTTPS. Where is it here? HTTPS, which is port 443, and I will save from anywhere, or we can just save from the CIDR block of our VPC. But let us just keep it as from anywhere, and I will click on create security group. Okay. So I will go on the left pane, and you can see security group. I will click on security group, So security group is right there on the left pane. So click on security group, and I will create security group, and I will call it VPC Endpoint VPC Endpoint Security Group, SG as security group, and I will say allow inbound traffic on port 443. On which of the VPC? Of course, our VPC. I'll select our VPC, and I will click on create security group. Okay, let me just add a tag so that the name will show. I will add tag. I will go down. I will add tag, and the tag will be name, and the value will be VPC Endpoint Security Group, and I will click on create security group. So I've created security group now that will be attached to the VPC endpoint to allow for API calls. Another security group that I need is the security group for our EC2 instance. So I will go back again to my security group. I will click on create security group, and I'll give it a name. I will call it EC2 endpoint security group. I will copy it because I'm going to use it below. I will say no traffic allowed because we don't need internet. So, and I will select the VPC, and I will keep everything as it is. I will add tag, and that will be name, and then I will add the value, which is the EC2 endpoint security group, and I will click on create security group. Now I have created, if you click on security group, you see I've created two security groups. Okay, let me scroll up. This is one of them, VPC security group and EC2 security groups. We are going to be using this in the later chapter. Now, we have created our VPC. Let's go back to our diagram. We have created our VPC. We have created subnet. We have created the security group for our VPC endpoint. We have also created security group for our EC2. Now, we need to also have in place our instance profile. This I have created before, but I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So we need an instance profile that we are going to attach to our private EC2 machine. That is very important. It is the instance profile that will allow us to use the session manager. Session manager is what we are going to use to connect to our EC2 instance instead of using SSH. So if you go back to our console now, and if I head over to IAM, I will click on IAM. You can click from here, or you can just type IAM. It's shown here. I can click and open on a different tab. So in my IAM, if I click on role, and I click and I search for SSM, which is SSM role for EC2, if I select that role, and if you look into the role, if I click and open up, you will see that this role is merely allowing you to use SSM service. SSM is Session Manager, which is a service that is provided by our EC2, our AWS Systems Manager. So this role, you need to create it and attach it to your EC2 machine. So I'm going to put this policy, the policy that is attached to create that role. I'm going to put it in the description section in case if you want to follow through, you will need to create this role and attach it to your EC2 instance. So I'm going to close that role. Now that we have created our VPC, created our subnet, and created our separate security group, the next thing to do now is to create our VPC endpoint. So I'm going to head over to my EC2 machine, my AWS console, and I'm going to go to VPC. Okay, I'm still on VPC. So on the left-hand pane, if you scroll down, you're going to see something called endpoint. Look at it right here. So if you click on endpoint, that is where you're going to create your VPC endpoint. I will click on endpoint. You can see we don't have any endpoint, so I will go and create endpoint. So the first endpoint I'm going to create will be the endpoint for my S3 bucket access. Don't forget, in our previous explanation at the beginning of the demonstration, we said that we have two types of endpoint. We have the gateway endpoint and we have the interface endpoint. And we said that the gateway endpoint is specifically designed for S3 bucket and DynamoDB. So in this VPC endpoint, we are going to be creating gateway endpoint for our S3 bucket. So I'm going to give it a name and I'll call it VPC endpoint for our S3. Okay, VPC endpoint, VPC endpoint for S3. VPC endpoint for S3. So we're going to keep it as AWS services, and I will come here and type S3. And if you see now, you're going to select the one that just says S3. So we'll select it, and see it's giving us two options. Is it a gateway or interface? And we know it is gateway, so we are going to select gateway. And we are going to scroll down. It's asking us which of the VPC. Of course, it is our VPC. We'll select it. We'll move down, and you can see which of the route table. Of course, the route table that we have created. We'll select the route table, and we'll go down. There's no policy. We don't need any policy. And we'll come down here, and we'll create endpoint. Now, we have created the first endpoint, which is for S3 access. So the next endpoint now, we are going to create 3 more endpoints, and those will be for our EC2 connectivity. And the first one we are going to do is the one that will allow us to access our EC2 machine through Session Manager. So now, this is likely to fail because on our VPC, we need to enable 2 items. We need to enable our DNS resolution and DNS host name. But when you create your VPC, by default, it is only the DNS resolution that is enabled. So we will need to go and enable our DNS host name. But I will go ahead and create it now, and you will see it failed. Then we'll go back and enable our VPC DNS host name. So I will continue. I will go to create endpoint. Don't bear in mind that this is going to fail, and I will give it a name, VPC endpoint for SSM, and I will leave it as EC2 service or EC2 services, and I will type SSM, and you can see the one here. I will select it. Of course, it gives me only interface. I will select interface. I will go ahead in which of the VPC. Of course, our VPC. Of course, it is IPv4, and we are going to select our security group that we created before. And this is what VPC endpoint security group. We need to select it, and you see allow inbound traffic to 443. Let me refresh. Okay, which is this. We'll select it, and we'll go ahead and create endpoint. You see now the endpoint fails. Why? Because it says enabling private DNS require both DNS support and DNS hostname. So we have to go back and enable our DNS hostname. So I don't want to close this. Okay, let's just do that. Let's just go back and enable it. So I will go back to VPC. I will click on my VPC, and I will select my VPC, and I will go to action. I will go to edit VPC settings. And if you look at here under DNS settings, you can see that we only enable DNS resolution. We need to enable DNS hostname. So you click on DNS hostname and you click on save. Now I'm going to go back to my endpoint. I will go back to creating my endpoint. This is endpoint here. We only have this one, so we'll go and create endpoint, and I'll give it a name again. I think I call it VPC. I hope I remember the name, VPC Endpoint. VPC Endpoint for SSM. I will keep it as AWS services. I will type SSM. I will select this. I will select interface. I will select the VPC, which is our SPZ Tech VPC. I will leave it as IPv4. And of course, I will select our subnet. What was our subnet then? Don't forget, it's our private subnet. I'll put it. Then IPv4. And I will select my my VPC. Sorry, my security group, which is this. I think I'm correct. VPC, because I'm having two there. That's a confusion. Okay, it should be this one. Allow inbound traffic to 443. I will select it. There's no need for any policy. And I will go and create endpoint. So the endpoint has been created now. This endpoint is for access SSM on our EC2. So we'll go now. We need to create two other one. Those one will allow us to connect from our EC2 to SSM to our S3 bucket. So you click on EC2 and I'll give it name VPC Endpoint for EC2. I will keep it as AWS services, and here I will type EC2, and you select this one that says EC2. Of course, it is interface. I will select my SPZ Tech. I will come here. It's going to show subnet. I will select my subnet, which is my private subnet, and then I will come here, and don't forget it is US is 1A, and I will come here and select my VPC. You can see VPC security group. I select it again, and I will go ahead and create subnet. And now we have one more, just one more. And we'll click on create endpoint again. And this one, I will call it VPC endpoint for EC2 messages. EC2 messages. That is another one that you need to add for EC2 messages. I will keep it as AWS services. I will type EC2 and I will type message. Sorry, EC2 message. And you can see that one here. You will select it. You select its interface. It's going to bring the subnet. You select the subnet. Let's wait for its subnet to load. It's processing. Okay. Okay, that didn't come up. Maybe it's not needed. Then we select our VPC, which is our subnet VPC. Then, okay, this is where the subnet is. We select our subnet, which is our private subnet. We select our security group endpoint. We select it. There's no policy. We'll go ahead and create endpoint. So now if I go back to endpoint now, I have 4 endpoints. One for S3 bucket, one for SSM, and the other 2 for EC2 services. So this one is still pending, but that is fine. In a couple of seconds, everyone will be available. So before we go to creating the EC2 instance, I just discover that one VPC endpoint is still missing. If you look at it from the first one, that is for S3 connection, the next one is for SSM connectivity, so that our EC2 machine will be accessible via Session Manager instead of the regular SSH. The other one is for EC2 connectivity, and the other one here is for EC2 interaction. So we are missing the VPC endpoint for SSM interaction, okay? Because after connecting to your EC2 machine via Session Manager, you will need the endpoint to undo interactive shell session, When you log into SSM, you're going to be you're going to be connected to a shell session. So you need the VPC endpoint that will guarantee that um, interactive shell session. And that will be done by the SSM message. Just like your EC2 has a message, we're going to take that for SSM message. So we'll go on create, um, we go on create endpoint. Let me just copy the name here. I'll just copy this name and I'll go on create endpoint. I'll give it a name and I'll call it VPC endpoint for SSM message. For SSM messages, I will keep it as AWS services. And here I'll type SSM. I'll add another M and it's going to show me messages. You can see that now, SSM messages, just like we have for EC2. So I'll select that. And of course, it's an interface. I'll select it. VPC, I'll select my VPC. And let us see whatever we need. Okay, it gave us a subnet. We select the subnet and it's our private subnet. And of course, we select our security group, of course, which is our VPC Endpoint Security Group. We don't need policy. Everything looks good. We'll go ahead and create policy, create endpoint. So if I click on endpoint now we have 5 endpoints for S3 buckets, 2 for SSM, okay, 2 for SSM, and 2 for EC2 machine. So we can now go ahead and create our EC2 instance in our private subnets. Now that we have created our endpoints, VPC endpoints, the next thing is we need to go and create our EC2 instance. Before we create our EC2 instance, I already have some of my S3 bucket created. So we need to be able to access those S3 buckets. So I'll quickly show you the S3 bucket. So if you come here and you type S3, this is S3 here, sorry. If you type S3, this is S3, you can open it in another tab. So you can see that I already have some S3 buckets. I have about 4 S3 buckets in my account. So we should be able to access this S3 bucket through our EC2 instance. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to go to EC2 instance. If you can just type EC2 instance, if you like, it's going to come up. You can open another tab. But if you already have it, like me here, you can just right click and open EC2 instance in another tab. So we are going to, I will close this banner and we are going to go on launch EC2 instance. And I'm going to give it a name, SPZ Tech EC2, or no, let me just call it SP Tech server. I'm going to be going with Amazon Linux. And why do I want to choose Amazon Linux? Now, we are going to be interacting when we log into our EC2 machine through SSM, through Session Manager. We are going to be interacting with our S3 bucket through the terminal. And for us to be able to do that, we need what we call the AWS CLI. AWS CLI is the AWS command line interface that allows us to interact with AWS resources via the AWS terminal. Now, whenever you spin up an EC2 machine, you will need to install this CLI, this AWS CLI. But don't forget that in our architecture, we do not have internet. So there's no way for you to install CLI unless if you baked it into your AMI, which we have not done in this case. So I have decided to go with Amazon Linux because Amazon Linux is pre-installed with AWS CLI. That is why I decided not to go with Ubuntu, but AWS Linux, because AWS Linux is pre-installed with AWS CLI, and there will be no need for us to install it again. So I will select AWS Linux and I will go with Amazon Linux 2023, and I will choose my T2 medium just for it to be a little bit faster. And I will go, we don't need a key pair because we are not going to be using SSH. I would select proceed without key pair, and I will edit my network, and I will select my VPC, and I will go with my private network, which is what I have here. I don't need a public IP address, so I'll keep it as disabled, and I will select existing security group, which the one we have created, which is our EC2 endpoint security group. You can see it here. It is a security group that does not contain any rule. There's no inbound rule because we don't need internet access. So for advanced configuration, we don't need anything. I'll keep this one as 8 gig, and then I will go down to advanced detail, and I will add my instance profile. I will add this instance profile, this one that will allow us, this instance profile that will allow EC2 instance to use SSM. So I will go down here, and under IAM instance profile, I will click a drop down, and I will select my SSM role for EC2. And everything looks fine, and I will go ahead and launch instance. So we have launched our EC2 instance, and we are going to give it a minute for it to, we are going to give it a moment for it to be available. So this is our EC2 instance here, which is running and is still in the initializing state. So we're going to leave it for a while, and then we will see what we needed to do. Now, while we wait for our EC2 machine to come up, let me quickly show you something very important. If I go back to my AWS Access Portal, you remember that I've logged into my account with the administrator access. Now, this administrator access comes with an access key. This access key is a temporary access key. You need access key to interact with AWS terminal or with AWS CLI, which was pre-installed on our Amazon Linux. So it is very important to configure your access key to be able to interact with your AWS CLI. But if you are using your IAM identity, maybe you created a user or a role, you will need to configure this AWS access key and secret access key or credentials. But one thing that is very good with your identity center, which is what I'm using here, for every of this role, you are provided with a temporary access key, which is only valid for the session of this admin login. So I've logged into my session now, and I only need 1 hour. So this access key is only available for 1 hour. So if I don't use it after 1 hour, it expires and it will be replaced or it will be updated. So bear that in mind, and we are going to be using it. Now let's go back to our EC2 instance. Let's refresh. Okay, it's still in initializing because of course it's going to install the CLI and all that. So let's give it a few seconds more, and we will see what we have. So finally, after a couple of minutes, our EC2 machine is now up and running. So I've selected it, so we're going to connect our EC2 machine now. So I'll go ahead and select the machine, and I'll click on connect. And if you see here, the EC2 instance connect, you cannot use it because what? There's no public IP address. Let me show you. If you come here, you can see now there's no what? No public DNS and no public IP address. So there's no how you would have connected through SSH or through Instance Connect. So we click on Connect, we'll go to Session Manager, and we'll click on Connect. So it's going to take us to the terminal. You can see we are connected now via Session Manager. And now you can type the command bash if you want to switch to your SS Manager user. Or let me exit. or you can type you can switch to your root by typing sudo su. You can of course you can switch to user. Let me clear the screen and exit. And you can switch to your EC2 user. Of course, you know that for any EC2 instance, your user is EC2 user. Let me click on connect. Let me go to instance. And if I click on connect, you will know that our user is EC2 user. Okay, you can see it from here. So you can switch to your EC2 user here by using sudo su EC2 user. And you can click enter. And of course, we are now switched to our EC2 user. Now, if you let us check if our AWS CLI is installed. So you type AWS version and you click enter, and you can see now we have what? We have AWS CLI already installed. But now let us check something here. On our EC2 instance, I'm going to go back to instance and I'm going to, okay, now I have created another instance which is Ubuntu. I want to explain the reason why I went for AWI, why I went for Amazon Linux. For Ubuntu, let us try to connect to our Ubuntu. Let's click on connect. Let's choose Session Manager. Let's click connect. So we are going to be connected to our Ubuntu now. So I'm connected to my Ubuntu. Let me switch to my Ubuntu user. So I will do sudo su Ubuntu. So I'm in my Ubuntu user. I will clear the screen and I will type AWS version. And if I click enter, you can see now it says what? No command AWS not found. Sudo install this. So it's telling us that AWS CLI is not installed and has given us a command to install it. But if we try to install it now, we are not going to be able to install it. Why? Because we don't have access to the internet. So I've typed AWS apt install CLI. So you can see now we are unable to install it because there is no internet access. So that is why I went with AWS or Amazon Linux 2023. So I'm going to go back to my session. Now that AWS is installed, I will clear the screen. And if you look back to our diagram, you find out that we have everything in place. Now we now want to access. Now we want to access from here to here. Don't forget we have signed in through SSM, and now we want to access our S3 bucket from our EC2 instance. So if I come back here now, and what is the command to access our AWS? I will type AWS S3 ls. This is the command to list all the S3 in your account. This is not going to work. Why? Because even though we have logged into our EC2 instance, we have not established connectivity to our AWS account. We need our AWS credential to do that. So if I click enter now, you can see that it says error, access denied, because the role that has been logged in, let me try to zoom in a little bit. You can see now the role that is logging does not have the permission. You can see now no identity-based permission to carry out this. It is not authorized to perform it. So what am I going to do now? I'm now going to go to my access portal. This is the account that login. This is what I used to log in administrative access. If you go back to my account, you will see it from here. I log in with my administrator access. So I will go back to my account. I will go back to my administrator access and I will click on access key and I will copy the access key. These are so many ways which you can use it. If you're on Linux, if you're on Windows, if you're on PowerShell, but I'm on Linux, so I will go here and I will copy it. You can use this one by setting a session. You can add this as a profile, but me, I want to pass it as an environmental variable. So as an environment variable. So I will copy this and I will close this. I will head back to my session manager. I will clear the screen. and I will paste this. So if I paste that, it's going to export my key, and it's going to, with my session token, which is only valid for 1 hour. So I will click, this is what I have put there, and I will click enter. So you can see now my credential has been configured. And if I go back to AWS S3 list, and I click enter, and you can see now I'm able to list all the S3 bucket in my account. If you look at it, look at the name, AWS CrowdTrade log, CF template, my app, and receipt. If I go back to my account and I go to S3, and you see exact the same name. Let me go down. Oh, that's too much. Let me zoom in. And you can see now AWS CloudTrail, CF template, my app, and receipt. These are all the account. These are all the what? The S3 buckets in my account. Now I can go. Now I'm able to establish from my EC2 instance to AWS to my Amazon S3 without no internet. All I've used is my VPC endpoint. I can go ahead and create a bucket. Let me try to create a bucket now. I'll do AWS S3 make bucket. And what is the name of my bucket? S3 colon / let me call it demo bucket from endpoint. And I'll click enter. And you can see this bucket has been created. If I go back to my S3 and I refresh, you can see this is the bucket, demo bucket from endpoint. You can see it, demo bucket from endpoint. This is the new bucket that I've created. Okay, if I go into this bucket now, you can see the bucket is empty. I can go ahead and put something in the bucket if you like. So this is just what I'm saying here. You have been able to connect to your EC2 instance, and from there you can access your S3 bucket. If I go ahead and delete my S3 bucket now, I can just come here and go at remove bucket. Instead of make bucket, I've just turned it to remove bucket, and I click enter, and the bucket has been removed. And if I go back to my S3 and I refresh, if I refresh, this is bucket now. If I click here and I refresh, you can see the bucket is no longer there. So this is how you have been able to securely access your AWS resources, in this case, S3 bucket, using VPC endpoint without exposing your infrastructure to public internet. Thank you for watching along with me in this video. You can try this in your environment and let me know what you have. If you have any question, kindly put it in the comment section, and I will take time to respond as soon as possible. I hope you like this video. Please don't forget to clean up after your demonstration, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.